She was just the night nurse, who never asked questions, never told stories, never let anyone get close, until the night she whispered something in Vietnamese, and her collar shifted to reveal a tattoo that should have been buried with the war. Welcome to Still Human. Before we begin this powerful story of silence, sacrifice, and secrets that span decades, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who served in shadows. The Veterans Affairs Hospital smelled like disinfectant and old pain. Margaret Chen had walked these halls for 30 years, always alone, always silent. She wore the same faded blue scrubs, spoke only when spoken to, and moved through trauma with a calm that unnerved the younger staff. When someone flatlined, when blood pooled on sterile floors, Margaret never flinched. But there were small things that made the observant ones pause. The way she handled Vietnam veterans differently, not with more care, but with a recognition that ran deeper than sympathy. The way her eyes would harden when she heard certain place names: Da Nang, Khe Sanh, the Mekong Delta. And there was her silence, not the quiet of shyness, but something heavier, the silence of someone who had learned that words could kill. What no one knew was that Margaret's silence was protecting secrets that could destroy lives. On this particular night in March, the ICU held William Morrison, a 72-year-old Marine dying alone. He'd been calling for someone named Phoenix for 3 days, but no family had come forward. Margaret took the night assignment without comment. She always took the difficult cases. She'd seen far too much death to be afraid anymore. She entered Morrison's room at 11:47 p.m., checking his vitals. His hands clutched the bedsheets with desperation. "Phoenix," he whispered, eyes closed. "Phoenix, where are you?" Margaret checked his chart. No visitor named Phoenix, just a man calling out to ghosts. What happened next would change everything. Morrison's eyes opened, clearer than they'd been in days, and he looked directly at her. "You," he said. "You're Chinese." "Vietnamese American," Margaret corrected automatically, then stopped. She never corrected patients. Morrison stared at her with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. "Vietnam," he repeated slowly. Were you there?" That single question unlocked a door Margaret had welded shut 50 years ago. Her hand tightened on the clipboard. But ghosts, as Morrison was about to prove, sometimes recognize each other. Morrison struggled to sit up. "You saved my life in Bien Hoa. August 15th, 1971, I was bleeding out from shrapnel, and this tiny Vietnamese nurse dragged me into a bunker and operated on me with nothing but a field kit and courage." Margaret's face went white. Her hands began to tremble. "She had a tattoo," Morrison continued, "right here." He pointed to his collarbone. "A phoenix. The mark of angels who weren't supposed to exist." And that's when Margaret's carefully constructed world began to crumble. The room felt like it was shrinking. Margaret took a step back, but Morrison's eyes held her like chains. "I looked for you after the war," he said. "Tried to find the nurse who saved me. But Phoenix program records were burned. They told me you were all dead." Margaret's breath came in short gasps. She looked toward the door, but something in Morrison's face, not accusation, but gratitude, kept her frozen. What happened next would expose a secret buried for 50 years. Margaret leaned forward to check Morrison's oxygen mask. Her movement automatic despite her shock. As she bent over him, her scrub collar pulled tight and shifted to the left. Morrison's eyes widened. There, just visible above her neckline, was a small tattoo. Faded with age, barely larger than a quarter, but unmistakable. A phoenix, rising from flames. "My God," Morrison breathed. "It's really you!" Margaret's hand flew to her collar, but it was too late. 50 years of silence, shattered like glass. For the first time in decades, Margaret was no longer invisible. She sank into the chair beside his bed, no longer the composed nurse, but a woman, carrying the weight of a war that wasn't supposed to have happened. "You're supposed to be dead," she said quietly, her voice carrying an accent she'd spent decades hiding. "We all are." Morrison smiled, the first real smile he'd managed in years. "Phoenix agents don't die, do we? We just disappear." But disappearing, as Margaret was about to learn, isn't the same as being forgotten. For the next hour, two ghosts recognized each other. Morrison told her about the other soldiers she'd saved. Margaret listened in silence, tears streaming down her face, tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed for 50 years. She told him about the others, about Lynn, killed in a helicopter crash, about Sarah, who died of Agent Orange exposure, about how she'd been the only one to survive. "They told us we were saving lives," Margaret whispered, "but we were also taking them. The Phoenix program wasn't just medical. We gathered intelligence, identified targets." The truth she revealed next would haunt. Morrison nodded. He'd known. "We did what we had to do to survive." "Did we?" Margaret asked. "Or did we just learn to carry the guilt quietly?" Morrison died at 6:43 a.m., taking with him the last link to Margaret's hidden past. The younger nurses found Margaret still sitting beside his bed, tears on her cheeks. They were surprised. Margaret never got emotional. But Dr. Rebecca Martinez noticed something else. As Margaret stood to leave, her collar had shifted again, revealing the tattoo. Martinez had written her doctoral thesis on the Phoenix program. What Dr. Martinez did next would change Margaret's life forever. That afternoon, Martinez approached Margaret in the break room. "Margaret, that tattoo on your collarbone, I've seen that symbol before, in declassified documents from the Phoenix program." Margaret set down her coffee cup. "I don't know what you're talking about." But Martinez persisted. The Phoenix was the mark given to female operatives. There were only 17 women in the entire program. According to records, they all died in Vietnam. The words that came next would shatter Margaret's anonymity completely. Except one. Margaret Chen, listed as MIA in 1972, presumed dead, but her body was never found. The break room fell silent. Other nurses looked up. Margaret turned slowly, her face pale, but composed. "Some records are wrong," she said quietly, "and some secrets don't need protecting anymore." Martinez replied. By evening, everything had changed. Word spread quietly through the hospital. The night nurse who had walked among them for 30 years was more than they had ever imagined. The Vietnam veterans on the ward were the first to understand. They didn't ask for details. They simply looked at Margaret differently, with recognition. But recognition, Margaret would learn, comes with consequences. James Patterson, a helicopter gunner, was the first to speak directly about it. "Ma'am," he said as Margaret checked his blood pressure, "thank you for what you did over there." Margaret nodded once, but Patterson saw the tremor in her hands. "We don't forget," he added quietly. "The good angels, we never forget." Word reached local veterans organizations within days. They began showing up at the hospital, not as patients, but as visitors, sitting in waiting areas during her shifts. What happened next proved that some bonds transcend time. The hospital administration was baffled, dozens of elderly veterans simply occupying space, not asking for anything. Just there, Dr. Martinez approached their leader, Frank Torres, who wore a faded 82nd Airborne cap. "Why are you here?" she asked. Torres looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. "She's one of ours," he said simply, "has been all along." Margaret never acknowledged the veterans directly, but her colleagues noticed her posture was straight. 3 weeks later, Margaret made a decision that would change everything. She requested a meeting with the hospital's chief of staff. "I need to tell you something about my background." Margaret told him everything. Not the classified details, but the truth about who she was, what she'd done. "I was never supposed to survive Vietnam," she concluded. "The Phoenix program was designed to be deniable. If we were captured or killed, we didn't exist. But surviving, as Margaret was about to discover, came with responsibilities." 2 months later, documentary filmmaker David Kim approached the hospital. He was working on a film about the Phoenix program and had heard rumors about a survivor. "You don't have to do this," Dr. Chen told Margaret. Margaret held the filmmaker's card. "The women I served with died, protecting secrets that don't matter anymore. Maybe it's time those secrets served them instead." The interview that followed would finally give voice to the voiceless. "Tell me about the Phoenix program," Kim said simply. Margaret was quiet for nearly a minute. "We were ghosts," she said. "Women who didn't exist, serving in a war that wasn't supposed to be happening." She told him about the training, the moral complexity, the cost, how every life preserved came with a price paid by someone else. "Do you regret it?" Kim asked. "I regret the necessity of it," she said finally, "but I don't regret serving." The documentary that aired 9 months later would change everything. The Phoenix Angels told the story of 17 women who had served in medical operations. Margaret was the only survivor willing to speak on camera. Letters arrived from children of soldiers Margaret had treated, people who had grown up hearing stories about an angel in the jungle. But the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. Dr. Angela Morrison, William Morrison's daughter, contacted the hospital. "He talked about you for years," she told Margaret. "He never knew your name, but he always said an angel had saved his life." Margaret was quiet, tears streaming down her face. "He died happy," Dr. Morrison continued, "knowing that his angel was real." That conversation changed everything for Margaret. On her 70th birthday, Margaret spoke at the hospital's all-staff meeting. "For 30 years, you've known me as Margaret Chen, night nurse," she said. "But my full story is Margaret Chen, former Phoenix program operative, survivor of classified operations, and guardian of memories, belonging to women whose names you'll never know." She paused, looking out at familiar faces. Lin Zhao, Sarah Patterson, Maria Santos, Jennifer Chang. 17 women who served, when serving meant disappearing. They were angels in a war that created too many demons. When she finished, on her final night, Margaret made one last round. In room 314, where Morrison had died, a new patient lay sleeping. Another veteran whose body had succumbed to wounds from a war that never ended. As she turned to leave, the patient's eyes opened. "Nurse," he said quietly, "were you there in Vietnam?" Margaret paused at the door. For a moment, she was 20 years old again, standing in a jungle clearing, refusing to let another soldier die alone. "I was there," she said simply. The patient nodded. "Thank you," he whispered. Margaret walked away, carrying the knowledge that some battles never end. The phoenix on her collarbone had faded with time, but its meaning had only grown stronger. It was no longer the mark of a covert operative. It was the symbol of the refusal to let sacrifice go unrecognized. Some stories are too important for silence. Some truths are too valuable for secrecy. And some angels deserve to be remembered, not as myths, but as women who served when serving required everything and promised nothing in return. So now I ask you, have you ever met someone like Margaret? Someone who carried history in their silence, who served without seeking recognition? Share their story in the comments. Let their names be heard. Because here at Still Human, we believe that the most powerful stories aren't always the loudest ones. Sometimes they're carried in silence for 50 years, waiting for the right moment to finally speak. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, subscribe to Still Human. Help us ensure that stories like Margaret's are never forgotten. We'll see you in the next one. And until then, remember, heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear scrubs. Sometimes they save lives in hospitals instead of jungles. But they're still heroes, still angels, still fighting the same war, just on different battlefields. Still human, because behind every uniform, every job, every quiet life, there's a story worth telling.